let's get started creating a chart using D3. So the key concept that we're going to learn about in this module is called data binding. This is a really fundamental concept of D3 that underpins a lot of the work that we're going to do moving forward. And data binding is just the process by which we associate data elements that we have with elements in the document object model, or the DOM. And so we bind each data element to a different node, like a paragraph or a list element or a circle or a square in the DOM. And so let's get started creating a really simple chart using D3. And we're going to do that using data binding. So the first thing we need to do is we need to take our SVG here, and we're going to create a selection. So we're going to use the select all method for D3, and we're going to select all circles. So what we just did is we found this SVG node in our document object model, and we went in that node and we said, select all of the circles that are inside of it. So if there are already circles existing there, those are going to be included in the selection. But if they're not, D3 is going to create an empty selection of circles that don't exist yet. That's kind of a weird concept to wrap your brain around, but just kind of a quirk of how D3 works is that it's going to select circles whether or not they're there. If there are no circles, it will create an empty selection, and it's going to compare that to your data coming in. So then we use the data method here. So we just chain that on, and we can pass in data, which represents this array of random numbers here. And what D3 will do is compare all the data elements that we have coming in. So we have 50 data elements, and it's going to look at how many circles are in its selection, which is 0. And then if we use the enter method, that means that it will add elements for elements in the selection that don't exist yet. So since there are 0 circles and we have 50 data elements coming in, and we pass the enter method, that means to add things, we are going to add 50 circles. D3 also provides the update and exit methods. So if you provided exit instead, and say you passed in 100 data points and there were 50 circles, it would remove 50 circles. So we're using the enter method because we want to add data onto our canvas. And after that, we add a line saying what we want to add. So it knows it needs to add 50 new elements, and we want to add circle elements specifically. So we're going to append on circle elements, and then that in itself doesn't trigger any updates. So what we need to do, we have those circle elements in our document object tree, but they don't have any attributes, so they're not showing up on the canvas. So we need attributes to make those visible to the human eye. So let's add some attributes here. And the first one we're going to add is the X position of the circle. And for each of these attributes, the way D3 works is we want to pass in the attribute that we want to change, and we want to pass in a callback function, which is how we're going to change the attribute depending on the data. So the first argument to that is going to be the actual data. So if that was more of like a traditional JSON that you might work with, that could be an object. In this array, it's just this number because we're just passing in a simple array. So D is going to represent our data. And then the second argument is just going to be the index. So that's going to be our index position in the array. And for this example, we're going to keep things simple. We're just going to make a horizontal line of circles. So the way we do that is just spacing them out by 20 pixels, depending on their index, and adding a little bit of padding at the beginning. Second, we want to set the Y position of the circle. And similarly, we're going to keep that simple. We're going to keep them all on one horizontal line. And so we're going to just set that at 50 pixels. And remember, SVG pixels go from the top left corner. So 0, 0 starts at the top left, and it increases as you go right or down. So that can be a little bit confusing because traditional coordinate system, like in math class, might start down here, but SVG starts up here at the top left. So actually bigger numbers, mean that you're going farther down the canvas. And, that should be CY actually for circle instead of just Y. And then we'll add one more attribute here for radius. Radius we're actually going to set dependent on the data. So for each data point, we're going to take that actual value and we're going to transform it. using the square root function. So we'll just take the square root of the data value, and that is going to be the radius of the circle in pixels. And we'll add one final value here for style, and that is going to be our fill value. So that's going to be the color of the circle, and we'll just make them all blue for now. And if we run that code with this play button here and observable, then we see those circles pop up on the screen. So we took all the elements we had in SVG, we compared that to our data, and we added new elements in based on the data that we have. And that is the most fundamental operation of D3. That's something you really want to learn and get down and be familiar with, because that is going to underpin the entire rest of the course, and that is going to be how D3 fundamentally works.